Villanova and participating in the tournament. And Jason, coming into the tournament, and before we get into Utah State Villanova and some of the things you learned today, going into this tournament, there was a lot of noise about it really amplified because of the Miami, Ohio situation, where schools like them, mid-majors, and I know we've heard this from Jerrod Calhoun, have been having a really hard time getting games scheduled and getting power conference schools to play them, either in their place or at neutral sites, let alone getting them to come to their own house. But what we've seen is these mid-majors are really going out there and throwing haymakers on the early parts of the NCAA tournament. And in fact, it was High Point's coach. First thing he talked about in the postgame was, these power conference schools won't play us, but they can't avoid us in the NCAA tournament. And these games need to happen more often. Then you can see how good our teams are and how good our programs are and how good our conferences are.
Yeah, it's something that, with the power conferences, they don't want to play the mid-majors because losing to them can end up, giving you a bad loss, or like you're at risk of a bad loss, because sometimes mid-majors can be kind of a bit volatile, whether or not they're having a great year, which the power conferences are kind of at fault for that because they keep stealing everyone's players. But yeah, I know we talked earlier this week about, how we didn't have many mid-majors, going past the second round. We didn't have, that many upsets. I picked, very few upsets, just with kind of the expectation that mid-majors were going to struggle to be getting these wins. And, I ended up being wrong on a few. For instance, I talked about how Wisconsin and High Point was obviously it was High Point's coach who was making those comments. He talked about how, nobody's led to a place, like they have to prove it now. Like, that was a popular upset pick, and I kind of went against it, partly because I don't like picking the popular upset, so to speak. Yeah, sorry, I'm just checking my audio to make sure I'm actually coming through on the stream here. But yeah, we're seeing, as you said, we're seeing the mid-majors throwing haymakers. I know South Florida and Siena, I know a lot of people were really pulling for Siena by the end there. They didn't end up getting the win, but they showed they belonged in those games. They showed they were capable of making things happen in those games.
Yeah, they pushed their opponents to the brink.
Yeah. So it was, in Siena, if they had any bench at all, literally, they win that game over Duke. South Florida with the big comeback, pushing Louisville by the end. And then, High Point actually pulling it off, getting that win. And that's something that, we'll see if it ends up continuing. I know for now, the successes have been limited. High Point is obviously a very, visible, kind of manifestation of mid-major hopes. But yeah, Siena lost, Louisville lost, Arkansas blew out Hawaii. Unfortunately, that's where Big Fish's career comes to an end. Isaac Johnson, North Dakota State ends up losing, and Troy and McNeese both lose by double digits. Of course, McNeese only by 10. Troy was 76-47. So there's still a lot of mid-major struggles, and I know a lot of people who try to harp on mid-majors maybe not belonging, or talk about mid-majors maybe they should have their own tournament. But I'm really hoping that we see more as the rest of today goes on, and as tomorrow goes on, that we're going to be seeing these mid-majors not just getting one or two first-round upsets, but you hope to see Utah State. Akron's going up against Texas Tech. Miami of Ohio, they're obviously there's going to be, they got the whole nation rooting for them against Tennessee.
Yes.
To prove a whole lot of people wrong. VCU have gone up against North Carolina. That was one of the few upsets I actually decided to pick. So hopefully we see some of those. But I think especially what the tournament needs is not a 13 beating a 4, an 11 beating a 6, or a 16 beating a 1 is always welcome, but not even necessarily that is the thing that we really need to see from mid-majors. What we need to see is a Cinderella run, because that's the thing that was entirely missing from last year. It was the year without a Cinderella, and it was one of the most boring tournaments I've ever watched. There's good teams, there's good basketball, but it's a boring tournament. So we need that Cinderella. We need something that the entire nation, and especially mid-major nation, Utah State is a part of that community. They need to be able to be part of that. We need the mid-majors to be able to make a bit of a run here. If it's Utah State that makes the run, that's fine, but we got to get somebody in there making a run.
Yeah, one of these has to make it into the second weekend, because that's when the story really gets told. And so it's you have a whole week of everybody talking about a Cinderella run from somebody out of the mid-major ranks, or even low major. If High Point, I don't know if I'd consider High Point a mid-major, but if somebody like that can get going, then that's going to capture a lot of attention.
High Point's a mid-major. I mean, you have high majors, mid-majors, low mid-majors, high mid-majors. There's essentially 2 or 3 classifications. The high major and the mid-major. You can throw in low major if you want to kind of have that distinction. That's what High Point is. They come from like the Big South. There's something like that. So yeah, High Point comes in as a mid-major.
So Utah State is in San Diego. They arrived on Wednesday. Or was it Tuesday afternoon? I'm trying to recall when they left.
I didn't ask exactly when they got there.
They might have left Wednesday morning, sure. Actually, now that I think of it. I think it was Wednesday morning. Either way, they're there. They've been there for a minute. Utah State is very familiar with that trip, how to get there, where to set up, where to practice. So they're familiar with the gym. They're familiar with that trip. Villanova clearly has to travel a lot further, and not sure what the fan base is going to look like for either schools in the showdown, but certainly a lot easier for Aggie fans to get there than it is for Villanova fans to get there. And I don't know if you haven't been there long enough to really get a sense for how many Aggie fans might be in the community just yet, but you did have a chance to visit with the players and the coaches. And before we hear from Coach Calhoun, what were some of the sentiments shared from the players from Utah State?
Yeah, I mean, they were asked a lot about, the familiarity of the gym. And they obviously liked it. There's some good memories for some of the players. There wasn't great memories this year, but last year, this goes to kind of what Coach said, but there was one reporter who said, yeah, you lost there this year. He was quick to point out, well, we won there last year. But like the familiarity with the gym, the ease at which fans, the relative ease, I should say. It's not always that easy to get from Utah to San Diego, but the relative ease for fans, bit of a appeal, like, hey, if San Diego State's going to have fans at the game, maybe have them cheer for the Aggies. As a fellow Mountain West school, and they didn't know that it was soon to be Pac-12. They just said Mountain West, but yeah, soon to be Pac-12, current Mountain West. If there are any San Diego State fans who are going out for a casual watch of these games, you'd hope that they would root for the Aggies. So, yeah, then, I asked them, one thing I asked the players was like, how do they view themselves in this game? And I phrased it in the sense of, Utah State, it's a high major versus a mid major. Utah State's the 9 seed, Villanova is the 8 seed, except that, since I last checked, unless something's changed, since I checked last night, the Aggies are a 1.5 point favorite. Sites like KenPom has the metrics. I think probably even Evan Mia, like they all favor the Aggies. Slim margin, but they favor the Aggies in what, by most accounts, should be Utah State as, an underdog. So I kind of asked him, in that sense. I wasn't as long-winded in my question as that, but, but Carson Kemp, when he was responding, he was like, hey, we felt disrespected in our seating, but, they're going to prepare, or they have prepared, and they expect to win games. So that's kind of how they do it. It's like, hey, there's some disrespect there, but we are who we are. We have a standard, expect to win games, and that's the way it's going to be coming into this game against Villanova. And then kind of one last thing with Mason Falsov, he was asked about, losing last year, but also, he's been on a winning and losing team in the NCAA tournament where he's played. And so he was asked about that, and he said, a lot of it just came down to defense, where it's, can you defend? The Aggies defended well against TCU. They did not defend particularly well against UCLA, especially when UCLA went on a late first half run. And so that was kind of the thing that Mason Fossa really took away from last year's team, that they're honing in on for this game against Villanova.
Interesting. Yeah, this is it's a Utah State team where some of their guys have NCAA tournament experience. Villanova, this is their first time back to the tournament after missing it for the last couple of seasons. But this is an interesting showdown between these two squads, where this Villanova team played really tough competition. They are more battle tested than Utah State in the type of teams that they went up against. But one of the things that I often like to look at when you come into these NCAA tournament games is what's the momentum of either team coming into this. Villanova comes into this NCAA tournament 3-3 in their last 6. Utah State 5-1. In their wins, in Villanova's wins, in their 3 wins, they were, they played well. Beating their opponents by an average of 83-69. But in their losses, it was virtually flipped, losing 80-61 on average in those 3 losses. Meanwhile, Utah State, in their 5 wins, averaging 80-69. So the Utah State offense and the Utah State defense doing well in how they're performing. But they did have that one loss in that stretch, and that was a bad one, losing 92-65 to San Diego State. Or show me that was to UNLV. So teams that Utah State has certainly more momentum on their side. Villanova lost early in their tournament, but Utah State rolled through theirs. And Jason, before we hear the audio from Coach Calhoun, any other thoughts from the players in kind of their momentum coming into this NCAA tournament and some of the experience that's maybe on some of their side?
There was some talk of momentum. I can't recall exactly what the players said in regards to momentum, though I know it was brought up. I know that their experience in the tournament was brought up. Everyone who is on all the players who have run it, because Carson, MJ, Drake, and Mason, all 4 of those players not only have played in the tournament, but they all played in the tournament last season. And something a reporter actually pointed out is all of them played in the tournament last season and lost in the first round. Obviously, 3 of those were the Aggies who were on the team last year, Carson, Drake, and Mason, but MJ Collins as well was on a team that lost in the first round. So all of them kind of have that recent, loss, I don't know if it's recent loss, but it's something that they remember. But yeah, as far as momentum, I don't remember particularly what was said there. I would note that I think you're on definitely gonna hit the nail on the head with the momentum. I know you kind of outlined just the basic scores, but even in the analytics, there is a pretty big hint that Villanova has kind of lost steam at the end of the season. They have had some strong performances, but they're a bit banged up injury-wise. They're missing their sophomore forward, their 6th leading scorer, and their 2nd best 3-point shooter. And really, they're only true power forward in the rotation. He's a 6'8" forward. Everyone else is kind of a guard who would play power forward. So they're missing a bit of that. He also brings a little bit of rebounding, where this is a great rebounding team, and he's one of the better rebounders they have. But yeah, it has the metrics. They have a metric for momentum, trying to measure how have you done recently. And Villanova ranks 352nd, where there's only about 10 or 15 teams that are worse than them in terms of how they're performing, relative to who they are. And Utah State isn't exactly doing spectacular in momentum. I don't know where the cutoff is as far as how many games it goes back. There might be an explanation on Hasametrics website somewhere. The Aggies ranked 265th in momentum. But I think when you look at it, again, that's probably where it's drawing from, the UNLV and San Diego State games.
It probably goes more 10 games back. Rather than the 6
I don't know exactly.
chose.
It's including some of those because the Aggies over the last 4 games are a different team than they were the previous 4 games. And if you kind of lump those 2 averages together, you get kind of a middling to below average momentum team. But over the last 4 games, and that's what's really fresh in their minds, they've kind of put behind them that late regular season stretch. And so I'd say the Aggies are one of the teams with the most momentum going into the tournament, and they need to be able to harness that. And that's something that's key as we talk about momentum and how important it is, but teams need to actually use that momentum, because momentum can be, kind of a double-edged sword where it's like, okay, you got a lot of momentum, but then you get too cocky, and then suddenly you're getting blown out in the tournament.
Or too much time has passed between.
Yeah. So you need to make sure that you actually utilize your momentum. Utah State needs to stay locked in. They've been locked in. The team that showed up in the Mountain West tournament beats Villanova and probably beats them comfortably in the state that Villanova is in. If Utah State rests on their laurels a little bit, it's gonna look a lot like the UCLA game last year. So that's a big key for the Aggies with their momentum, is they have to properly use it.
All right, so let's hear from the coach. Jerrod Calhoun visited with the media in the press conference today. We kind of summarized what we heard from the players, but let's hear specifically from head coach Jerrod Calhoun as he visited with the media and addressed some of their questions and some of his thoughts leading into the matchup. After I sneeze.
Yeah, just extremely grateful to be here, excited about the matchup. We've had good prep, and obviously it's going to be a difficult game, but we're really excited to be here.
Just got to remind you, no recording of press conferences, please. Thanks.
Jason Walker with Cache Valley Daily. You've talked a lot this season about when your defense is able to get set. You guys have been really good. Villanova is a team that doesn't really get out in transition a whole lot. I guess how much does that potentially play to your advantage where there's going to be a lot of plays where you're going to get your defense set?
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes people talk a lot about defense, but it's really your offense, right? We got to run good offense to get our defense set, right? So if we're turning the ball over, we're taking bad shots, that's going to lead to runouts for Villanova. But we got to be who we are. I think NCAA tournament time, it's about playing to your strength, playing your identity. We've been really good at creating turnovers, flying around, playing green, which has then led to good offense. So we got to continue to be who we are, finish plays. I think that's the biggest thing, Jason, is finishing with good box outs. And, they're going to shoot a lot of threes, and we got to box out and finish plays.
Jeff Nyberg from the Philadelphia Inquirer. How did playing for Rolly Massimino impact the coach you eventually would become?
That's a very complicated question. Coach Mass took a gamble on me. I was a local kid in the Cleveland area. Paul on my staff, Molinari, had a big part of that. Paul ended up coaching me in college, and then he ended up being in my wedding. He's one of my best friends. What Coach Mass taught me about running a program is family. We run it very similar to the way he did. Our student managers are a big part of our program, our support staff, our administration. I don't know if there was another coach that I've ever seen really bring people together like Coach Mass. He was very charismatic. He had an energy every day, never had a bad day. His wife was incredible, Mary Jane. Used to cook us pasta every 2 weeks. His sons were a big part of the program. And, a lot what we do structurally is from Coach Mass, and it's pretty surreal to be coaching. I'm sure he'd be proud against, his favorite team.
Sean Harrison with the Herald Journal. Coach, you talked a lot about practice days, having good practices. Now, playing 3 games in 3 weeks, or 3 games in 3 days last week, how have you recovered from that, and how have practices been this week?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a fine line of contact, bone-on-bone contact, and you're getting good in your concept. So we've done a little bit of both, Sean. I think the guys are excited, but we've really, taken a really smart approach to it. Brandon Buskey is a big part of that. our strength coach. We don't want to overdo it, but we also got to get some conditioning in. I thought, the way we approached it was really good. You can't lose your endurance this time of year, but you have to be healthy. Guys are all banged up. Basketball's a long season. So I liked what we did. I thought it was really good, and I think we've had good practices.
Dylan Johnson, the Villanovan. Coach, the players were just in here talking about playing in this arena over the last 15 years, different experiences, not just this team, but you win at home against San Diego State University, but you fall here to them. What's it like to be able to play in this arena going into March Madness, but then also get your first tournament game here at this site?
We beat them in here last year in an epic game. Tucker Anderson made a game winner. So our guys are used to San Diego. I said this when the seed came out. I think it's one of the best cities in America. Where we're staying, it's breathtaking. We're overlooking water. It's 80 degrees. It's hot in here. We're outside. There's very few sites for our fans that have these amenities. Also, travel's really easy. We get on a plane and we're 75, 80 minutes away. So a lot of our returning guys are used to Viejas. I think one of the best venues. The Aztecs have just a tremendous following. This is a basketball place. So I think it's a great venue and really good for us personally.
Griffin Floyd, Philadelphia Sports Now. You overlapped with Kevin Willard in the Big East when you were an assistant at West Virginia. How has he, stayed the same and changed as a head coach over the last 15 years?
Yeah, I think what makes Kevin Willard really good, obviously he can recruit. He has a system. He does a tremendous job of changing his defenses up. He's learned from one of the best to ever do it, but then he's put his stamp on it. The guy wins everywhere he's been. I thought it was a home run hire when he went to Villanova. We've got to be ready for a lot of different things. He makes you adjust as a coach. I've watched about 8-9 games of theirs. Watched, a lot of tape on this team, and they can win in a variety of ways. I think that's what makes good programs. They can win really pretty where they're making threes. They can win ugly. He has the ability to, play different lineups, and I thought he's done as good a job for a first-year coach at Villanova in this era, getting them back in the NCAA tournament. Just a A-plus hire and an A-plus performance by him and his team.
Hey, Coach Mark Green with the Utah Statesman. You talked on Sunday about making history in the regular season and conference tournament, but then wanting to make more history this weekend. Just how have you been able to kind of impress that on the mind of your players?
Yeah, just have an edge. We had an edge. We won 3 games, 3 days. Having an edge is playing every possession, possession by possession, whether it's on offense, defense, coming out of a timeout, understanding the details of the scout, what pick and roll coverage you're in, setting your defense, finishing around the rim. We got to do all those things, and it starts in your prep. We got a little bit more prep today on the court. We got a little more prep at the hotel with the film session. And then, not being anxious. I think a lot of these teams, as you watch them, they get anxious, right? Whether it's shooting the ball or, just playing in general. There's a lot of hoopla with the NCAA tournament. Rightfully so. It's the greatest tournament on earth. But our guys have played in this environment before. We've got multiple guys, not just our returning guys that have done it together, but we got a lot of transfers that played in the NCAA tournament too. So stick to who we are and keep that edge.
Ira Gorwara with The Athletic. Coach, MJ is saying the Mountain West tournament was sort of like a revenge tour. How is that? How have you seen the locker room have an extra jolt of just confidence and belief because of what you guys did in the tournament?
It kind of goes back to Coach Massimino and the guys that I've learned under Coach Huggins, Jeff Young at Walsh. I think messaging is really important to your team. There's certain parts of a season that you got to break some things out. And we kind of broke that out, and it worked out really well. UNLV had beaten us, Nevada, San Diego State. The last time we played those teams, they beat us. So I come up with a lot of messaging. We have former players, former coaches, our donors. I thought Jim Lobb gave a great speech to our guys. In every game, we have a different speaker after we eat pregame meals. So I wanted them to know this was our revenge tour, and, they really bought into that.
Another one for Drake, his life has changed a lot in the last month. How has he balanced just getting enough sleep and enough rest at this time of the year?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's, just a tremendous opportunity for him and his wife. She's on the trip. Once again, she's part of our family. So making sure that they're comfortable. The baby is, was sound asleep on the plane. And Drake's done a great job managing that, right? I mean, we didn't know if he was going to play for a couple games. We had no idea. And everything worked out great. Healthy baby. He's getting his sleep, and honestly, he's playing inspired. He's now playing for somebody else, his son as well.
Mark Greenwood with Utah Statesman again. Did you mention kind of being anxious a little bit? This is now obviously in our second year in a row. Last year didn't go how you want. Maybe looked a little anxious against UCLA. Just how do you kind of adjust, and what are things you learned from last year coming into this year?
There's different points in a game where it can go, north or south. I thought the end of the first half, UCLA last year went really south. We never recovered. It was 24-23. They went on a 13-0 run, I think, to end that first half. So got to manage, different parts of a game. And those returning players remember that, and that's got to inspire them to play 40 minutes.
Jason Walker with Cache Valley Daily. For the last month and a half, you've been playing teams that you're familiar with, conference opponents you're playing for a second or even third time. How do you kind of switch back to kind of a non-conference mode where this is a team you knew nothing about really as far as on the court, a few days ago?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's exciting learning a new system. To me as a coach, there's nothing better than game prep. How are you going to use 45 minutes, an hour, whatever our length of practices are? What's our film sessions going to look like? What I've learned in the Big East, it's a very physical conference. Villanova's guards are very physical. They try to bully the ball. They get in the gaps. They play very green. They go for steals. Duke Brandon is tremendous get for them. He's a guy that really knows who he is, plays well with their guards. Lewis is tremendous. Freshman, as good as anybody in the country. So just continue to learn about them, implement our system, the game plan. That's what makes March Madness so fun. There's not a lot of sleep for the coaches. There's a lot of coffee intake. I may challenge Coach Willard to a coffee so you can drink the most. I saw something, he said he's about 13 cups a day. I'm not quite to that level, but probably about half of that.
Jerrod Calhoun with The Athletic. Coach, you mentioned messaging is really important for the team. At this time of year, how important is it for that messaging to come from the players and not to be led by the coaches?
I mean, that's how you go from good to great. Our last month, our leadership from Drake and Mason and MJ, this is a special team. You don't win a regular season and a tournament title if you don't have special people in the organization. And I think those three kids have really taken extreme ownership of timeouts, coming out of timeouts, our huddles, practices when we need to pick it up. And then we've got guys off the bench that have great leadership. Carson Templin, his voice is heard very loud on our team. So we get a lot of leadership in different ways, some by example, some by using their voice. But I think you hit it on the head. You go from good to great. Great teams are led by the players.
Sammy McKee with the Villanovan. Coach, how do you match up against Duke Brennan, a player who's obviously had a very significant role for the Wildcats, but has also kind of had some experience on the West Coast playing for Grand Canyon?
Yeah, I mean, I think that was one of the better portal gets in last year's cycle. I think by committee, kind of how we've done it all year. Gary Clark has really come on strong lately. Zach Keller has carried us, and Carson Templin has been tremendous, sixth man of the Mountain West. So I think you have to do it by committee. The thing that makes him great, Duke, is his motor. There's very few players in the country that have his size and his ability to go get the basketball. When I watch him play, he really knows who he is. And I think a lot of guys try to play outside their comfort zone. He's comfort in his own skin. He knows who he is, and he's a winner. And he makes winning plays.
Speaking of the forwards by committee, you've got a lot of guys in that 15 to 20 minute range. Do you just kind of ride the hot hand, or what goes into deciding who to play at what moment?
Yeah, I mean, every game presents different matchups. I think you have to go into a game and you have a game plan, and then all game plans are typically off, right? Because you got to change things, and we have done that. We've done it by committee. Who's playing well, foul trouble. Obviously, this time of year you have to play really smart. You have to win those margins. You can't put good teams at the line. So you got to play good defense without fouling. But it's a field thing and then sometimes a matchup thing.
So there he is. That was Coach Jerrod Calhoun earlier today in Las Vegas, meeting with the media, talking about his team and their preparations for their showdown with Villanova. Jason, some of the things that stood out to me, and want your thoughts on this as well, but Utah State certainly had a chip on their shoulder going into the Mountain West tournament. It was their revenge tour, right? They're facing all these teams who had just recently beat them. Can they have that same level of intensity and focus tomorrow like they had last week in Las Vegas? I think that's one of the big questions that I think Coach Calhoun is also trying to make sure his team realizes as well.
I think it's possible, and I think that's where maybe they've, hung up on the fact that they felt like they were underseeded. They got a 9 seed when, Coach felt like maybe they should have gotten he was kind of, trying to get a 6 or a 7 seed. With his comments after the Mountain West tournament, give us a 6 seed. But more realistically, I think was hoping for a 7, at worst an 8 seed, and then they got hung with a 9 seed, which isn't the first time the Aggies have been underseeded. I think it was Craig Smith's team ended up being an 8 seed, which at the time, and it still is, the highest seed they've ever gotten. I think they were projected to be a 6, or maybe that was Danny Sprinkle's team that was projected as 6. I can't remember all the specifics there, but yeah, I think that may be one thing where they try and hang on to that, where they say, hey, nobody respects you, so put a chip on your shoulder, and that can be motivation, because at the end of the day, one of Jerrod Calhoun's biggest jobs is motivation.
Yeah,
like however you motivate, and sometimes you got to manufacture that motivation. I always kind of remember the New England Patriots, one of their Super Bowl runs, they were pretending they were the underdog. They'd say, yeah, we're the underdog, and this and that and the other, and everyone kind of looked at them like, no, you weren't. But in their minds, they were finding, and again, kind of manufacturing bulletin board material for themselves in that sense. So the Aggies are trying to make sure that they stay motivated in whatever way they can do it, whether it's focusing on being underseeded, whether it's, you're facing the toughest opponent, at least on paper, that you've faced all season. You look at, well, how did last year's run end for this team? You've got, nobody on the roster won an NCAA tournament game last year. Everybody who went to the NCAA tournament last year lost. You do have some players that have won an NCAA tournament game. Mason Fosslett being the one who I think played. I don't know if Carson Templin actually played during that game where Danny Sprinkle, that team won a game. I can't remember if Carson played at all in that one, but he's on the team.
Right.
But yeah, you got to find a way to motivate these guys, because as I said earlier in the show, if the version of the Aggies that shows up in the Mountain West tournament, the one that was locked in, the one that was much more like the non-conference version of the Aggies in the early conference play, if that version of the Aggies showed up, who did so, on a neutral site game, and in one game, they commented that having the herd there kind of made it a home game, but still a neutral site game, or what was technically kind of supposed to be a road game when you're facing UNLV,
yeah.
It was something they were able to bring themselves. Like Utah State has at times, even to a fault, relied on their home court advantage to pull them through a conference season. That's kind of what they did late in the regular season. They lost 3 games on the road, and they won their 2 games at home, which helped them clinch the regular season title. But in the Mountain West tournament, they went on the road away from the herd. I know the herd kind of came to them, and they still had a bit of that there, and they'll have a little bit of it here in Viejas. There are some members of the herd traveling, the band and the cheer squad and all that, but it's going to have to be kind of like that championship game where, the crowd isn't necessarily bringing the energy for them. They've got to be able to manufacture that, and they did that in the Mountain West tournament. And so if that same team shows up, in Viejas tomorrow at, 1 p.m. local time, I think. I need to double check the time again. I'm confusing Mountain Time and Pacific Time again. But if they show up like that, they're going to win, or they're going to go down swinging like crazy. So that's kind of the key for them there.
I know we've got a couple of texts on the Young Power Sports of Logan text line, and I'll need you to check those for us, Jason, with our setup here.
We have 9-15 on the text line. I think it's just the one text saying, "Looks like High Point just did a kid job of wrecking everybody's brackets." So yeah, it's
you know,
High Point.
I did not pick High Point, and I'm totally fine with them messing up my bracket.
Yeah, well, I'm kind of upset because that was the popular upset pick, and I ran away from it for that purpose. Whatever the popular pick is, South Florida was a popular pick too, and dadgummit, that one nearly worked as well. And so I kind of ran away from it because I think it was last year or 2 years ago. There was a really popular upset pick, and I kind of leaned into it, and I ended up getting burned. So this makes a ton of sense. Of course, this team's going to win. I think it was UC San Diego, actually, where they were a really popular 12 seed upset over, I forget who they were playing. I think it was Missouri or something like that. But they didn't end up pulling it off, though I think it was competitive. So credit to UC San Diego in that one. But I didn't want to lean into it. There were a lot of people who were hunting story over substance. They have High Point has the kid who had shot 4 2-pointers the entire season, as opposed to, I think it was 130 or maybe even 160 3-pointers. Hadn't made a 2-pointer all season, although he did actually make a 2-pointer in the game against Wisconsin, and it ended up being the game-winning basket, actually. There were a lot of people that were kind of hunting that story. They were trying to compare him to Oakland's shooting guard that hit a bunch of 3-pointers in either the last tournament or 2 tournaments ago. And I was like, I'm not going to fall for story over substance, but it turned out the story was legit.
You're right.
And
right.
I ended up being wrong. My numbers and analytics were, of course, I don't know if the numbers and analytics said the High Point couldn't win, but in fact, there were some indications that was there because Wisconsin, according to the analytics, is a pretty volatile team, kind of in the same way the Aggies are. I leaned away from the story and got burned because March is about stories, and sometimes it happens.
There are some great stories. The Nebraska story today was fun. So the Siena leading by double digits going into the half over Duke, just running out of gas eventually.
Yeah.
So there's been some really fun stories so far.
Yeah, the Siena one, and I hate to criticize, and I don't think I'm really going to, and I hope it doesn't come across as criticism because I don't want it to be that, but where he played 5 players, his starters, for 39 minutes and 50 seconds, or technically 39 minutes, 49.8 seconds, and it's I don't want to criticize, but rotations are, at least 7. In the tournament, you can get a rotation as little as 7. And there's a reason that they'll go down that small, but there's a reason that's usually the smallest they go. And it's because guys are human. I know they're 22, 23 years old, and it seems like they have boundless energy. When I was 17, 18 years old, I played literally back-to-back on the same night, doubleheader basketball games. Sometimes when you're young, you just got that fire and you can do it.
Right.
But there's a reality to being tired. For instance, I mentioned those back-to-back basketball, that doubleheader I played, we lost both games. Second one because we were tired. Sometimes you have the energy to actually do it, but not to finish it out.
Well, would they go 5 or 6 minutes without a bucket late in the second half? I mean, that's an illustration of tired legs, but also, Duke dialing up their defense too.
Yeah, and the reason I don't want to criticize is because they came closer than really all but a handful of 16 seeds in history. Only 2 ever have pulled off what they almost did today. There have been a few that I think were a little closer, within 1 or 2 possessions, that didn't cross the threshold of getting the win, the way UMBC and Farley Dickinson ultimately managed to do. So far be it from me to criticize, Sienna, their head coach, their strategy, because they dang near did it. And you can maybe nitpick in the end, but again, they dang near did it against a freaking good Duke team.
Yeah. Yeah. So, the NCAA tournament, it's like a national holiday. We brought out the spread today, all kinds of sandwich and fixins and treats and chips and drinks.
You brought the food to work when I'm gone?
That's right. Jason's gone, so we're going to party. Get everybody in
they don't have to
around the big TV
they
in the
know they don't
conference
have
room.
to bring out as much food. Now that I'm not there, I'm not going to eat all the food.
And you know what? We'll do it all again tomorrow because it's another big day.
I'm going to go eat an extra expensive dinner tonight and put it on the company tab.
There we go. All right. Well, Jason, any final thoughts with Utah State and Villanova getting ready to square off tomorrow in the NCAA tournament in San Diego?
Yeah, just really excited to see how it plays out.
Did you get a chance to listen to the San Diego or the Villanova coach by chance, or any of his players?
That press conference was happening because I basically had a choice to either be at the Villanova press conference or watch the Aggies open practice. And I chose to go watch the Aggies open practice. I wanted to see how they were looking as they were essentially warming up. They ran a few drills. They weren't doing anything, because it's an open practice. You had the band there. There were a few people cheering. Although, to be honest, they had the Sienna Duke game, and the High Point, Wisconsin game, like on the Jumbotron. People were watching it and cheering. When High Point hit that go-ahead, layup on the fast break, everyone was cheering pretty loud. And when they finished it off, they were cheering pretty loud. Utah State looking solid in their warm-ups at least. I mean, you always shoot decently well when you're shooting in warm-ups, but the Aggies look like they're pretty used to the gym.
Well, I guess the question would be Mason Falslip. Does he look like he's good to go and 100%?
Yeah. I don't think anybody's 100%. I don't think he is. I mean, he looked fine.
Good enough to go to compete.
He hit 5 3-pointers in a row right in front of me, so he must have been okay. MJ Collins was draining it too on the other side of the court. Sean Harrison was watching me. He was watching for like 2 or 3 minutes, and he leans over and he says, "I don't think MJ Collins missed when I was watching him." So some of these guys are hitting shots, although there was a stretch where I saw, I think, 8 straight missed 3-pointers from Elijah Perryman, Zach Keller, and Tucker. They were all shooting like kind of at the same time on the same basket. So there was some mixed warm-up 3-point shooting, but yeah, I think the team is going to be as ready as it can be. And again, I think, part of me is a little worried about how optimistic I am for the Aggies in this game, because it's usually when you feel the most optimistic about a win for a team that you're covering or a team that you're rooting for, that's when they end up getting blown out by 20 points. But I really think that the Aggies have a great competitive shot. I think they have good matchups. I think they have a good game plan. They're going to have a good game plan. There's going to be challenges that Villanova presents, but I think the Aggies can be up to that challenge. Whether or not they end up, standing up to that challenge is the thing that we have yet to see. But unlike last year with UCLA, where there were some serious concerns, where it was like, I'm not sure, man. They got that 7'3" kid who's actually now at Michigan, Addy Morrow's, a key rotation player for one of the best teams in the country. UCLA had some size that Utah State just didn't know how to handle. But I don't think there's anything Villanova can present that the Aggies can't handle. It's just a matter of who's going to come out and execute better. If the Aggies execute better, then, that's just – and it's going to be a pretty simple result. But if they don't, and obviously Villanova obviously has a lot of say in this too. It's not like the Aggies control everyone's destiny in this case. Villanova certainly has their own say in this, and they're going to be trying their hardest. But I think there's a lot of advantages toward the Aggies.
Well, again, reminder, pregame coverage on our sister station, KVNU, will start at 1 o'clock on 102.1 FM, 610 AM. The game itself will not be streaming, but the pregame will be streaming. But once it gets to the game, the NCAA and Westwood One controls the streaming rights. So these games are being broadcast on 106.9 The Fan, also 1390 AM, and streaming on the Fan mobile app and on the website. But we can't guarantee you that you'll hear the full entirety of the Utah State men's basketball game tomorrow afternoon as it tips off at about 2:20, 2:10, 2:20, something like that in the Mountain Time, something like that. So
I do got to point out, we did get a text a couple minutes ago and we didn't get to. It was about that Duke Siena game where 8632 saying Duke won because the refs awarded Cam Boozer for putting himself in bad situations. Never seen a player wrap himself up in double and triple teams and magically get a foul call like him. Yeah, that's something that can happen where you get a player like that. It kind of reminds me when I watched Zach Edey a couple of years ago where he'd just draw a foul if you breathed on him.
Yeah, he's a dominant player, and he mixes it up, and sometimes he makes it hard for refs not to call fouls the other way.
Yeah, so I wasn't watching the game closely enough. Like, I was looking over every few seconds to see what the score was. But, yeah, that was an impression I got following the social media feed as well, as the Cam Boozer kept getting a lot of great whistles. But Siena also slowing down their crazy three-point shooting they had earlier in the game also certainly didn't help as well.
Yeah. All right. Well, make sure you check on CashValleyDaily.com. Jason will have a preview of the matchups between these two teams. And then I'll keep checking back on it tomorrow to see the recaps and what happened, what took place, as Jason's able to be there in person and give observations based on what he sees with his own two eyes there, and what's said after the game concludes. And we'll see. We're going to try to get something going Saturday morning, kind of a reaction to what happened on Friday with Utah State and what's next. Are they preparing for another opponent, or is their season done? So just stay tuned for that on our YouTube page, The Fan KLGN. But that'll do it for us. Have a great night, everybody. We'll be cheering on and paying close attention to what happens with Utah State tomorrow afternoon, and try to do some things on our YouTube page on Saturday morning.